Thanks everyone for being here. And yes, so this began here as a Kickstarter funded project. And a lot of it was about raising the money in order to produce a series that went beyond the more commercial titles. It let us dig deeper into the archives, but it was our partnership with the Library of Congress that really allowed us to get an unexpected wealth of film to choose from. And it was a pleasure to have these films made available to us, have the resources of the Kickstarter campaign to give us the room to free ourselves of most commercial considerations, and the support of Kino Lorber to basically do this project and do it right. And I wouldn't say spare no expense, but it allowed us to expand this from what was going to be a 5-disc set to a 6-disc set. And I promise you, every disc is maxed out with films. In fact, we were calculating the minutes to see how many films we could put on here, because to us it was essential that we not just have the greatest hits of women directors of the silent era, but show films that otherwise are not going to be seen, the fragments, the lesser known features, and the filmmakers whom we know very little about, because that's how you get a full perspective of this movement. And I'm very proud to feel like I've contributed something to sort of laying a foundation upon which academics, just fans, and film preservationists, and people who are do film restoration can build on and add to, so that this knowledge continues to expand and we learn more about it. Because as you'll see when you watch the films, they are really fascinating films, and in a lot of ways they defy your expectations of what you think women directors of the 1910s would be producing. I couldn't have done this without Shelley Stamp, who will now hopefully approach the stage, because she brought a breadth of knowledge about these films in the process of curating the collection. And it was nice to have her insight and also her knowledge of what is at the various archives. So she deserves the lion's share of credit for the composition of what's in this collection. And before she steps up, I can't run down the whole list, but I would like to thank all the composers who participated and contributed scores to the films. It was such a labor of love for everyone involved in it, and we really hope that comes through in the collection. So Shelley, please come up and tell us about it.
Thanks, Bret. I think we're going to have to argue over who did the lion's share of the work. It's been really one of the great honors of my life to curate this series, to work with Bret, who has done an extraordinary job supervising the restorations of these films, commissioning scores, putting everything together, putting together extraordinary featurettes that give us insight into the history. It's been a privilege to work with the Library of Congress, to work with the Women's Film Preservation Fund. It's really been an extraordinary partnership. So the films that are in this collection chart an extraordinary range of women's filmmaking in the early years, deliberately so. So there's a huge range of film genres on this set. There's comedies, there's westerns, there's melodramas, there's action-adventure films. There's a huge range of kinds of films. There's shorts, there's features, there's ethnographic films, there's amateur films, there's film fragments, as Bret said. We felt it was very important to show films that don't survive in their entirety, that are in bad shape, so that you can see the full scope of what women did. And then the other scope I think that it charts is the different contexts in which women worked. So many of the films on the set were made by women working at Hollywood studios. The 2 films that we're going to see tonight were made by women working at Universal. But we also have a range of other kinds of production contexts. So we have films made by women working at their own studio. Alice Guy-Blaché in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Nell Shipman in remote northern Priest Lake, Idaho, Marion Wong in Oakland, California. Or we have the example of Angela Marie Gibson, an amateur filmmaker working in Castleton, North Dakota. Or Zora Neale Hurston, shooting ethnographic films in South Central Florida of African American communities that nobody was documenting in the 20s. So the scope of the kinds of films that are in this collection is, to me, really extraordinary. And many people ask me when they hear about this set, you know, what was it about the early film industry that attracted so many women? And my answer is, why not? This was a brand new medium. It was really exciting. It offered the possibility for creative work and fulfilling work. And the early film industry was, for lack of a better word, maybe artisanal, right? It was easy to move from one position to another, you know, to write a scenario and then act in it and then maybe figure out where the camera ought to be and direct the other performers. It was easy to move back and forth between acting and writing and directing. Those roles weren't as defined or codified. So the industry was open to women in that sense. There was a tremendous need for film product in the early years of the film industry. So somebody that had a little bit of gumption and energy and some people to work with could make films and get a foothold in the industry in the early days. And maybe most important of all, women's voices were valued in the 1910s and 20s. They were valued in the film industry. The industry understood that the majority of its audience was female. And then in order to speak to a female audience of moviegoers, you needed to have women working behind the scenes as well. That, you know, 100 years on, that's a battle we're still fighting, which is really extraordinary to think about. And the women that were making films in these early days were not shy about claiming the industry for themselves. Right? Cleo Madison, when asked, you know, if she was ever afraid to direct, said, "Why would I be afraid to direct? I've acted in so many films directed by men who don't know what they're doing. Why would I be afraid?" Ida Mae Park wrote a chapter in a 1920 book called Careers for Women. There was an entire chapter on the motion picture director as a career for women. She said, yeah, it's a lot of work. It's physically demanding, it's mentally demanding, it's exhausting, but there's no finer calling for women. It's an extraordinary field for women. That was 1920. When that book was reissued in 1934, the chapter on motion picture directing was missing from Careers for Women. And another bold claim was made by Alice Guy-Blaché in 1914. She wrote a piece in a trade journal called Woman's Place in Photoplay Production. And you might think it might be a sort of timid plea for, oh, please let us in, please let us in. And no, what she says is, not only are women good filmmakers, she makes the bold, radical claim that women are better suited to film directing than men. And she relies on some cliches about femininity, but boy, I think her argument is really interesting. She says, women are authorities on the emotions. Women understand interior mental life and are therefore better able to direct performers who need to control their emotions in a dramatic setting. That's a really interesting argument. She says women have an attention to visual detail that is essential in motion picture storytelling. So she says women are not just suited to filmmaking, we're better suited to filmmaking. That's 1914. So again, 100 years ago, we're still making that, we're still having to make those kinds of arguments. So to me, the question isn't really, you know, why was the film industry so attractive to women 100 years ago? Of course it was attractive. Of course they were interested. Of course they were laying claim to this new field. The better question is, why have we forgotten this? Why do we not know this work? It's the number one question I get. Why do I not know about this? So we're hoping through this extraordinary set to get the word out about the range and scope and beauty and complexity of films that women made 100 years ago. And to begin to right a wrong that this historical amnesia has caused, right? So generation upon generation of female filmmakers in the past 100 years has had to feel like has to reinvent the wheel. She's been told again and again and again that, well, there's no precedent, there's nobody like you, nobody's ever done it before. I heard Greta Gerwig called the first American auteur last year. Nothing against Gerwig, that's insane from a film historian's point of view, right? So we're hoping that this set helps to really fill in the picture of the extraordinary work that women did in filmmaking 100 years ago. So tonight we're going to show you two brief two brief films that from this series. And I'll say a little bit about the first one, and then Lynn Ann from the Library of Congress is going to talk about the restoration of the second film. So the first film we're going to see is Suspense, directed by Lois Weber in 1913. Weber was on the precipice in 1913 of becoming one of the top filmmakers in the country. Certainly Universal's top filmmaker, Carl Laemmle. Universal called her his best man on the lot. 1913, she was really poised to start making features and start defining herself alongside D.W. Griffith and Cecil B. DeMille as one of the three great minds of early cinema. What you see in Suspense, one of her short films, is Weber taking on what by then would have been a very well-known formula, the last-minute rescue formula, most associated with D.W. Griffith. A formula where a woman or two or three women are trapped alone in some remote house or location that is beset by intruders, and they're rescued at the last minute by a father or a boyfriend or police or some combination of all of the above, right? Spoiler alert. So Weber is taking on this extremely well-known formula, and in calling her film Suspense, giving it a sort of generic name, she's letting us know that she's playing with the formula, right? She's letting us know that. And this is an absolutely virtuoso film for 1913. There aren't many films from 1913 that look like this. Absolutely extraordinary compositions. Watch for moving camera work, watch for mirror compositions, watch for overhead compositions, watch for triptych split screens. This is a really virtuoso performance. So she's taking on a formula associated with D.W. Griffith and saying, hey, look what I can do. So the story isn't that different. Cinematically, this is an absolute virtuoso performance. So that's the first film we're going to see, Suspense. And the next film we're going to see is When Little Lindy Sang, which was made by one of Weber's contemporaries at Universal, Lulu Warrington. And what's interesting about Weber is she became Universal's top director in the 1910s, but she was not alone. There were many women making films at Universal in the 1910s, many of whom are collected on our set. Film historian Mark Garrett Cooper counts 170 films released by Universal in the 1910s, directed by women. They were called the Universal Women. And Universal took great pride in the women that were making films at Universal. They considered the beauty and the brains behind the scenes at Universal City a key selling point of their studio. Really extraordinary to think about. So we'll see two examples of what was going on at Universal in the 1910s. We'll see Suspense by Lois Weber, and then Luann's going to talk about the restoration of When Little Lindy Sang in between, and then we'll see When Little Lindy Sang. So, okay, enjoy. Oh, I should say as well, new scores. The Suspense has a new score by Skylar Nam, which is phenomenal. The composers that Bret found for this collection are really an extraordinary range. Many female composers, many young female composers, and the scores are just phenomenal. The score by Skylar Nam is really, I love it, absolutely love it. So thank you, enjoy.